2-0. So right now, our bracket is starting to look as Bob Wong is going to be playing Andrea Mengucci in the next round. Julian Knob is going to be playing Jarvis Yu. Caleb Durward is going to be playing Vincent Chandler. And Noah Walker is going to be playing the winner of our next match, which is Phil Gallagher versus Brian Braun-Duin.
Indeed. This should be a good one. So I believe we have from Phil Gallagher, Death in Texas. What else from the Thraven University Proctor? And then on the other side, we have BBD running back his Grixis control list from both the Pro Tour and the past couple weeks of the Legacy Premier League. Now, so here we have Phil's list in front of us. So what jumps out to you about this list, Rudy?
This list looks basically what Phil submitted before. The one thing that is very interesting here, and something that we note, is Phil has a lot of basics. He has 7 snow-covered planes, 7 planes. He added a Tower of the Magistrate, and when you look at his bracket, you know, there were potentially a few people who could play Death and Taxes, so this is kind of a concession to the mirror a little bit, and sort of War and Peace is as well. So it looks to me as though Phil was very prepared for the mirror. The question is his deck also going to line up well against Grixis control here?
Fair enough. The thing that really jumped out to me actually about that main deck is I'm seeing 3 Mirren Crusaders in there. That seems like a huge number, and I wonder how that'll fare against the Grixis control list, because usually I feel the Grixis control with a lot of Colgan's commands and cheap removal has pretty favorable Death and Taxes matchup, but 3 Mirren Crusaders will get protection from the Strix, from Fatal Push, etc. So I'm imagining that that'll be a pretty key threat for Phil. The other thing that I noticed is I don't see any main deck recruit. Oh, no, never mind. There are. There's 2 right there.
There is no main deck Batterskull, though, which is actually a really wild choice here. Whenever I think of Stoneforge Mystic, I think part of its ability to really win games is the ability to go Stoneforge into Batterskull here. But it looks like, based on how Phil decided to build his deck, is he wanted to be a smaller kind of white weenie deck, maybe favoring that kind of mode of Death and Taxes, you know, this kind of aggro creature mode, versus instead of being the kind of grinding out Death and Taxes deck that we're really used to.
Right. I also see that, interestingly, it looks like Phil's only got 3 Rashadan ports and 2 Caracas, when the standard numbers, I believe, are 4 and 3. So he's gone a little bit down on that plan here. So probably had in mind kind of what matchups he might be facing. And yeah, you're right. The no Batterskull main, I think, is a very interesting choice. I imagine that, you know, if he's expecting to see things like Strixes and Gurmag Anglers, it's possible that he just decided that Batterskull was not where he wanted to be. Doesn't line up too well against those kinds of things. And instead, you know, go up to 3 Mirren Crusader and just turn that double striker sideways and get through the Strixes. One interesting thing to note as well, and I think that some folks in chat pointed this out, is that the Tower of the Magistrate, I believe, can give a creature protection from artifacts. And if it does that, then that means that whatever creature is protected from artifacts can... does that mean... No, let's see.
It does. Tower of the Magistrate is kind of this old hedge from Legacy. I don't know how long you've been playing Legacy for. I don't want to assume here, but back in the day when Stoneforge Mystic,
right? I do remember those days.
Was the biggest thing, and Blue-White Stoneblade was one of the big decks. Blue-White, maybe a little touch of black sometimes. You know, after Lingering Souls came out. But before that, it was Blue-White, and with Tower of the Magistrate, you were able to actually turn off, you know, somebody being equipped from a sword or Batterskull even, or an Umezawa's Jit. So that's a good thing. It does also, I believe, protect you from Baleful Strix. So it is very interesting, right. Kind of callback.
Baleful Strix, yeah.
But okay, here we're going to have BBD's list, right? And BBD here, not really doing anything crazy, not doing anything out of the normal here. Pretty much everything is at its place in the main deck, except BBD's playing 3 Jace, and he's playing only 1 Diabolic Edict.
That's interesting. I think, to me, that makes sense. I thought Diabolic Edict was at a really kind of all-time high great before people started playing Grixis Delver with Young Pyromancer again. So I know that when, you know, some folks were testing Grixis Delver lists at the beginning, they were running things like Womack Courier, in addition to the Delvers and maybe Treaty Nemesis and Gurmag Angler. And all of those threats are fairly vulnerable to Diabolic Edict, or at least Diabolic Edict answers each of them. But one of the things that I think a lot of people that have been, when they've been testing Grixis Delver, have found is that Young Pyromancer is still an amazing threat. So I remember we did a testing session over here near Washington, D.C., and I remember testing against Paul Kwong, and he was playing a Grixis Delver list with Young Pyromancer. And we found that that was just an extremely good threat for providing a different angle of attack and going wide, and kind of blanking things like Diabolic Edict or Liliana the Veil. And so I think perhaps as the metagame cycles, people start playing Young Pyromancer again, you're going to see people go down again on Diabolic Edicts in the main. So I think that makes sense to me. You also see kind of the 2 island, 1 swamp basic plan, so pretty heavy on the non-basics, which is also, I think, what we've been seeing in the Grixis control lists as they've evolved to have both, 2 bad lands for ability to cast him, etc. Cool. All right. Well, I mean, it looks like we're going to have a great match ahead of us. Should be a treat. I'm really interested to see how the Mirren Crusaders fare here, because my impression was that it was kind of a tough match for Death of Texas, but we'll see if that does something for us. Okay. What do you think of these opening hands?
Yeah, Mirren Crusader is great too, right? Because BBD only is playing 2 Lightning Bolt. So BBD ways to interact with Mirren Crusader are very low. But I mean, I'm not really surprised to see Phil mulligan his first hand, right?
A bunch of lands. Right.
A bunch of lands not very good here. I really like this 6 here, a couple Aether Vials, a Flicker Wisp, a Swords to Plowshares, a Wasteland. This is going to be kind of okay against most of the strategies. And I got to tell you, if I'm Phil and I sit down and I see that I'm playing against BBD, I'm going to assume BBD's playing some fair Underground Sea deck.
Right.
And I don't think that's unreasonable. And BBD here's hand is pretty
Yeah, I think, you have a Brainstorm, so you got a lot of flexibility there. But one thing, though, is that their hand, it's a little slow. I mean, you get to fix your hand on turn 2, assuming you don't get Wastelanded or something like that. But, if you're playing against Death and Texas deck, if they, go turn 2 Thalia or turn 2 Wasteland, as we're about to see, you could really kind of find yourself off to a little bit of a slow start. But here we go, the Brainstorm on turn 1. So do you think if you're BBD, you would have fired off that Brainstorm if Phil had not Wastelanded you? I probably would have, but...
I think there's not really a need to. He has a ton of lands, has Baleful Strix, and when you see that Phil is kind of leading off with Plains Aether Vial, there's not really too much that that you're looking for. I think that this Brainstorm is okay in response. It may not be a necessary thing for BBD here, and it looks like his hand is kind of just there, starting to put some things together here. Polluted Delta. He's just going to go ahead and pass, maybe insulate himself from Mauritian Port or Wasteland off the top. And I know he's going to ship it back here to Phil. And Phil is going to have to activate his vial here, I think, at the end step and put in Mother of Runes. I don't think his hand really lets him do anything else.
For sure. I think you definitely want to do that. And what you'll find is that CTB doesn't have any 1-mana interaction, which I'm pretty sure is what he was trying to find last round or last turn. So, maybe when he was digging with the Brainstorm, he was hoping to hit a Lightning Bolt or Fatal Push so that he could answer something like a Mother of Runes before it untapped. Because now all of his point removal he kind of relies on to stop the board from getting out of control. Now that's all blanked. And so even though kind of Phil's looking like pretty low on gas, I think he's in a pretty good spot here. He's got the Vials ticking up. He's got the Mother of Runes ready to start protecting any creatures that he gets down. So I guess we'll see what BBD counters with. It's going to be like a fetch, a fresh draw off the top, and I'm guessing a Baleful Strix.
Oh, yeah.
Ponder might change things, but probably
I don't think so. I don't think there's any reason for him to go ahead and cast Ponder. I think we're going to see Underground Sea Strix, and that is what we are going to see here. Strix is going to go ahead and redraw here, the kind of artifact Elvish Visionary, if you would. We'll see if there's anything here. And Phil is just getting aggressive. Phil wants to fire off this plow as soon as possible here. And this is kind of interesting, right? If Phil is using his Swords to Plowshares this early on creatures, that says to me that he thinks he has to get this game over.
I don't know about you, but creatures is generally the only thing that I fire my paws off on. But I think you're definitely right that that is a snap, no hesitation, just throwing it off. I think that I found that in this matchup, you do end up having to plow the Strixes to get through. Maybe that's not the case if you have 3 Mirren Crusaders, but since Flicker Wisp is the only creature in Phil's hand right now, that would be stonewalling it unless you use a Mother of Runes to give it protection from that color and swing through it. So I think that it makes sense that he would want to just snap that off.
This is great here. This is actually great. Tom, do you see what Phil just did here? Do you want to explain to our viewers why this is so good?
Sure. So what Phil did is he waited till the end of after the beginning of the end step of his turn, and then he used the Aether Vial to put in the Flicker Wisp. When he does that, he can target a permanent. He chose BBD's Underground Sea, and then it exiles it until the beginning of the next end step. Well, the beginning of that end step just happened, so that means that land is going to be exiled during BBD's turn and won't allow him to use it for any sorcery speed cards that he would want to play. And so he'll get it back at the end of BBD's round, which also will obviously pinch him on mana for any sorcery speed interaction or sorcery speed stuff. So that's a nice heads up play. That's one of those kinds of things that Death and Taxes likes to do to really kind of get the ball rolling on the Mana Denial, and it's one of those bags of tricks. And just goes to speak to the power of Flicker Wisp or any creatures really when you can use their abilities at instant speed by putting them in off the wild. So.
Yep. And another heads-up play from Brian here. He's going to go ahead and pass back, let the land come back into play, and during Phil's upkeep, he's going to cast Brainstorm. Now, if you're wondering why Brian's doing this is kind of a weird spot to cast Brainstorm in. When we think about Brainstorm, we think about, I need to cast it on my end step. I need to cast it, on my main phase. These are times to cast it when I need to look for something. So if Brian's casting it right here, what it says to me is that he's playing around with cards like Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, which Phil can put it off of his Aether Vial to 2, and Spirit of the Labyrinth. So he's essentially trying to make sure that he can progress his hand and field in a way that lets him play around the maximum amount here. And Phil, Thalia right off the top, how blown out would most of the players been here had they just waited till the end step to try to cast a Snapcaster Mage?
Well, so on the other hand, blown out a lot is the answer. But Thalia is still really good here. It's uncounterable because it's coming in out of the Aether Vial.
Absolutely.
That's going to reduce the velocity of BBD's spells, and considering he has 2 cantrips but not a lot of other things in his hand. When a cantrip costs 2, that dramatically decreases the amount of things you can do after you cast one. So
here.
Looks like we're going to get a Ponder, I'm guessing, since BBD just played a land and fetched, if I'm not mistaken.
For sure, and I do not believe that Brian has access to Toxic Deluge in his main deck. No, it does not look so. So his ways of clearing out a board are going to be a little tough, and it's going to be a little bit of work here. Now, Tom, you got to see, BBD's intentionally keeping these Force Wills in his hand. Why is Brian keeping these? They can't really be that great here, right?
I think he's been kind of forced into doing it. I don't think he's really intentionally doing it, but I think he's had a lot of lands, more than he needs. And so I think that he's just keeping some cards over keeping lands that he won't need. So I'm guessing that's what is happening. But other than that, I can't really think of why. I mean, the only spells that Phil has are the Fruiture Vials, which he doesn't need, Source of Plowshares, and the equipment. And I guess Phil might run out of equipment and get it forced, but the hope there is that you wait to be able to put in an uncounterable Stoneforge Mystic through a vial, and then use that to put in equipment that's also uncounterable through Stoneforge Mystic's ability. Yeah, okay, and here we're seeing one of those 3 Mirran Crusaders. So these have been a couple of nice rips here for Phil.
Yes.
And I guess this is interesting. I guess one of those things that's pretty obvious, but Kolaghan's Command, being a black and red spell, means that it cannot target Mirran Crusader. So that means that once that Mirran Crusader comes down, I'm pretty certain that the only way for BBD to get off the table is the 1 Edict, if there was no other creatures on the board, or one of the 2 Lightning Bolts he has. So, that being said,
Brainstorm.
That being said, with a Mother of Runes,
yes.
I don't really see how BBD is going to get out of this board.
No, I think that's going to be a tough one.
And that's, I think, going back to the very first turn where BBD brainstormed, I think that's why he was brainstorming then, because he didn't have a 1-mana piece of removal, knew that his deck was pretty cold to a Mother of Runes active on turn 2, knew he would only have 1 mana on his second turn after the Wasteland from Phil. So I think that he was realizing all of those things back on the first turn and trying to brainstorm to put himself in a position that he could answer a Mother of Runes coming in off of the vial on that turn.
And this is a really interesting predicament. BBD can choose to try and elect to cast Ponder. Maybe he wants to Edict here. He wants to kind of pass. If Brian passes here, he does have the option that if Phil decides during the end step to activate this Aether Vial, to use Kolaghan's Command to destroy that Aether Vial and make Phil discard. But it looks like he is going to go ahead and fire off this Diabolic Edict here, try and clean up something. Flicker Wisp obviously is very good here. Mother Rune's very good. Thalia might be the weakest creature here, but it is kind of prohibiting BBD from being able to cast multiple spells in a turn. So I'm really not surprised here to see Flicker Wisp go ahead and hit the bin from this Edict. And we're going to go ahead and flip over to BBD. BBD's going to go ahead and cast Ponder here.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I mean, it's one of those things, we can see both players' hands, so we both see how insane it would be to have Kolaghan's Command up at the end of the turn. If Phil went for the Aether Vial to put it in the Mirran Crusader, which he is likely to do. But, on the other hand, if you're BBD, you're staring down a board that's already a big problem, and you need to kind of think about what you can do to get out of the situation. And, there's a good chance that Phil just drew a land or some other thing that he was not a Mirran Crusader. So, still could have been a creature, and Kolaghan's Command would have been useful in that regard there. But I don't fault BBD at all for making the play that he did and just trying to answer one of the creatures. All right, so what would you do if you were BBD with this Brainstorm? Oh, sorry, Ponder. Rudy, are you there?
Sorry, I accidentally muted myself to type something. But if I'm Brian here, I'm definitely going to be keeping the Baleful Strix, the Angler, and the reason being is that we don't know how many Mirror Crusaders. Brian has no idea what the deck lists are. Brian is not aware that Phil has a bunch of Mirror Crusaders here, but he is aware that Gurmag Angler is going to line up pretty well against Thalia, and Baleful Strix is going to go ahead and line up pretty well here. So I'm not really surprised to see them keep here, but we are going to see a blank off the top for Phil. Phil's going to go ahead, turn Mirror Crusader and Thalia sideways, and Brian's going to go ahead and chump.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, so BBD will be able to commit some creatures to the board, but again, this is the Mirror Crusader with the Pro Black, so right now, all three of the spells in BBD's hand that could answer this board or could try and get him back in the game, they're all cold to Mirror Crusader.
Yeah, unfortunately here. We're going to see Brian go ahead and shuffle. He knows that there's an island on top of his deck. Going to play Baleful Strix. Going to redraw the island anyway here and just going to go ahead and have to pass with this Kolaghan's Command and Gurmag Angler up here. If you're Brian, how are you getting out of this?
That's a good question. So someone made a good point in chat. Max Thorson made a good point in chat that last turn Phil had the Aether Vial on 2 and 3. And as we've seen, he's very reliably been activating the Aether Vial with the lower count first, the lower counters count. So if he had gone for the Mirror Crusader, he could have activated the Vial on 2. That might have potentially forced BBD to think about Kolaghan's Commanding with the discard, and then Phil could have responded with the activation on 3. So just going to show the kind of things that these players are keeping in mind while they're just playing a game. It's not just tap my Aether Vial on 3 and throw it in there. Phil probably had that in mind, knows that interaction is
absolutely here. And we do see Phil draw Recruiter of the Guard here. Recruiter of the Guard, very interesting Magic card, very powerful for Death and Taxes. I remember when this card got spoiled, everyone was really excited for what it offered. This deck's kind of strategy. Being able to open it up to just kind of have extra copies of every card in the deck. So I got to say, Phil's probably pretty excited to draw this card here. We are going to see Phil attack though. Baleful Strix is going to go ahead and hit the bus. Tied to this Thalia, Mirror Crusader is going to come in for 4, dropping Brian to 3, and this is not looking good.
I agree. I think that Phil's in a really good spot, and BBD's in not a great spot. So definitely agree with you there. Recruiter of the Guard is a good card. I think it adds a lot to the Death and Taxes deck, and also people I think in the Pro Tour, for example, Alan Wu was playing 1 Mirror Crusader, 2 Recruiter of the Guard, so you could always fetch it up in the matchups that it was good. But here, you have 3 Mirror Crusaders and 2 Recruiters, so if you want a Mirror Crusader in the match, you're likely to have one.
Absolutely here. End step, we're going to see this Kolaghan's Command activate, try and take out this Mother of Runes, buy back Snapcaster Mage. Mother of Runes going to activate, give itself protection from black here. You can't let that go. You have to try and hope that BBD misses here on a removal spell here. And Kolaghan's Command off the top, not too shabby. Not too shabby, but Brian has a lot of work ahead of him.
I mean, even if Brian had something like a Toxic Deluge or a Damnation so he didn't have to lose life, Phil could still EOT Recruiter, fetch up a Thalia, Vial in the Thalia EOT, swing for 3 on an empty board. So I don't think there's any way for BBD to get out of this. I think that I like his play of EOT Kolaghan's Commanding and just knocking the top of his deck. But so let's see. So he can do a Diabolic Edict. He can do Snapcaster Diabolic Edict. And so the response to this is almost certainly going to be putting in Recruit. Oh, he's doing Kolaghan's Command. Okay, so I guess that makes sense because he can kill the Mother of Runes while she's tapped, and I guess an Aether Vial or return a Strix.
If I had to guess here, I would likely guess that this Mother of Runes is going to hit the bin and that an Aether Vial is probably going to get destroyed, probably the Aether Vial on 3, and then a follow-up of Gurmag Angler here. But of course, this Recruiter of the Guard is going to go ahead and probably come in here if I had to guess.
Yeah, I think you're right. Let's take a quick look. Does Phil have a main deck Palace Jailer? He does not. Okay, So that means I think that because of the Snapcaster Mage being able to chump the Mirror Crusader, I don't know if there's a way for Phil to win next turn for sure, because the Gurmagangler can block the Thalia, and Snapcaster can chump the Mirror Crusader, and then Recruiter the Guard gets in for 1.
And we are going to see Recruiter the Guard come in. We are going to see it get a Stoneforge Mystic. Pretty reasonable card to get here. I do not believe that there is a sort of feast and famine here for
Jarvis makes a really great point. Sorry. I sort of cut you off.
No. It's fine. I believe Flicker Wisp was an option, but I believe Stoneforge Mystic getting sort of Fire and Ice actually just does the same exact thing. Fire and Ice filed in off the Stoneforge Mystic equipped to Mirror Crusader gives Mirror Crusader protection from both Gurmagangler and Snapcaster Mage, and that should do it here.
Yep. That's exactly what we're seeing. I mean, to be honest, there's probably a lot of lines that could have got you there. I mean, even just putting more dudes on the board, but like, for example, getting a Phyrexian Revoker and wiling that in on 2 probably would have done it. I haven't done the math, but I think that would have worked. So there was a lot of ways to slice that one, but sort of Fire and Ice on a Mirroring Crusader is just a delight. If any of you have had that happen before, it just feels amazing. If you hit them twice, get 2 SoFi triggers.
Absolutely here. What I really would have liked to see is Phil activate his Vial, put in the other Thalia, just to let Brian know that he drew a blank card there. That's right. Just to let him know. But we are going to get the sideboarding here. If you're Phil, how are you sideboarding this matchup, Tom?
Good question. So let's take a quick look here. So if I'm Phil, what don't I care about? Source of Plashers I don't care about. I agree with that. Sarah Avenger just, gets chumped by, well, not chumped, but trades with Baleful Strix, trades, poorly with Baleful Strix all day. Batterskull, interestingly, comes in. So that means that Phil actually thinks that, I guess, it's better than the GT, which I'm intrigued by, because I would have assumed that the Batterskull gets hit by K-Command, gets hit, gets blocked by Baleful Strix, that kind of thing. So I'd have assumed Batterskull is not great, but I guess the ability to rebuy in a long game is valuable. And on the other side, I would have thought that GT is good because you can use it to off Strixus and Snapcaster Mages and that kind of thing. But I guess, maybe that's just not good enough. Maybe that's just not where you want to be in this kind of matchup.
No, we're going to go over and check Brian's sideboarding here. It looks like these Force Wills going to go ahead and hit the bin. We're going to see Liliana the Last Hope, Diabolic Edict, Pithy Needle, and Marsh Casualties. That's exactly what I want to board in. Force of Will, very medium overall. I am kind of surprised that Brian is boarding out Gurmagangler. What that says to me is he believes that the matchup is firmly about the Planeswalkers and just getting to the Planeswalkers and just drowning Phil in just with Jason Liliana advantage.
I think you're right. I think that, taking out the Gurmagangler's completely blank Source of Plowshares if Phil kept them in, or more or less completely, they can still offer Baleful Strix, but that's not great. And even if you do get a Gurmagangler down with 3 Mirroring Crusaders, which I don't know if BBD knows about, but with a lot of Mirroring Crusaders, with flyers, with equipment, and that kind of thing, you often have little white weenies just kind of attacking past or stonewalling the Gurmagangler. So I don't mind that, and I think bringing in the sweepers and the keep relying on the Planeswalker plan makes a lot of sense. Okay. So looking at opening hands, Phil does not have a white source but has an Aether Vial.
There we go. Sorry, my it stopped working for just a moment. I wasn't able to see anything. But we do see here that this is a really interesting hand coming out of Phil. Basically relying purely on the power of Aether Vial. He drew a play, it's off the top.
Sometimes you get a little lucky. But on the other hand, the only spell in his hand he's actually going to be trying to cast is Rest in Peace. And it's good to have that down, but it's not a priority, I don't think, to get it down immediately. I think it's okay to wait a couple turns, because the graveyard doesn't get really good until you get to the point where you could cast a Gurmagangler or Snapcaster Mage something, and that generally doesn't happen until 3rd, 4th turnish.
This is really heads up play from Brian, because Brian boarded out all his Gurmaganglers, so the only graveyard card available for Brian is Snapcaster Mage, and I've never really hated it that much to just have a Ambush Viper.
I think one of the things that's also backbreaking for Death and Taxes in a long game is the ability to just rebuy Snapcasters and recast Kolaghan's Command multiple times. And Rest in Peace just shuts that shenanigans off at the source. And unless I'm mistaken, maybe BBD has an Engineered Explosives, but if he doesn't, I don't think he has a way to answer this. which, I guess that's fine. But
yeah, I just don't think there's a way to. I know personally, I played in engineered explosives in the sideboard of this deck because I liked it again for its utility. And even against decks like Death and Taxes, sometimes they just have permanents that you're unable to deal with here. It looks like this Kolaghan's Command has kind of become a shatter plus discard, which I think is still fine 3 mana. It's still very good against a lot of what Phil is presenting here, and we are going to see exactly that from Brian. Kolaghan's Command is going to destroy this artifact. It is going to make Phil discard. Phil's going to discard his Recruiter of the Guard, the most expensive card in his hand here.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, without a Vial, I think that discarding the Recruiter makes sense. You're not going to have, with 2 lands, you're not going to have the ability to really kind of get super efficient on playing Recruiter and playing lots of creatures or Flicker Wisp chaining or that kind of thing. So I think that makes sense to me. But I think we're seeing here like one of the risks of keeping the low land / no white mana producing land starting hand with 1 Aether Vial, because BBD has multiple ways to answer the Vial. And then once that happens, you're playing with 2 lands in a deck that really needs to get up to 4 or 5 by some point, or at least 3. So luckily, Phil's hand is kind of a little bit cooperating with a bunch of 2-drops. And
this is really really great here. Brian did draw Liliana the Last Hope off of that Baleful Strix trigger, and this is a great feeling, right? Seeing that Spirit of the Labyrinth come down after that's already happened here. So I think we're going to go ahead and see here. Brian is going to go ahead and probably use this Liliana the Last Hope to some major advantage here and kind of keep Fatal Push for something else that he cares more about.
That's
he's going to play Snapcaster Mage during the end step.
Okay, so I guess he's playing Snapcaster Mage just to be on the board, have blockers. But he's definitely slamming his Liliana the Last Hope. Like, she definitely can just take over the game here. She is an amazing planeswalker, and particularly against a bunch of X1s. So that's what we see right there. Makes sense to me.
Okay. We're going to see here, this is an interesting part where Stoneforge Mystic, normally a pretty reasonable card here, is going to go ahead. We are going to see Phil play it. He's going to go ahead and get equipment. I have to imagine he's going to get something along the lines of Batterskull here. Batterskull is probably just the most impactful equipment that Phil has in his deck. So that is obviously pretty good. But overall, things are not looking good for Phil.
I agree. Things are not looking good for Phil. This Liliana is taking up. He's pinched on mana. He's behind on board. BBD's got a full hand. Things are definitely not looking good. And Death and Taxes, it's a pretty mana hungry deck. People play 23, 24 lands plus 4 Aether Vials. So it's got a lot of ways to have mana or cheat on mana. And if it doesn't have that Aether Vial, it really does need to make its land drops. So
this is great here. We're going to see Brainstorm go ahead, put back a Lightning Bolt, I believe, and a Brainstorm here. Brian is going to go ahead, play Baleful Strix, redraw into that Brainstorm, and then play the Badlands and Fatal Push the Stoneforge Mystic here, essentially stranding the Batterskull in Phil's hand. And now Phil is in this weird spot where he's really far behind and falling further behind as time goes on here. But he's going to play Sword of Fire and Ice and hope that might be good enough at some point to catch him up.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen for Phil. So, we'll see how this plays out. But, BBD's already kind of in a commanding spot as a control deck, attacking for 4 with his, 2 mana card advantage creatures, and he's got Brainstorm and a hand of answers. So.
Yeah, absolutely here. And Flicker was off the top. Another X1 here. Not looking great in the face of the Liliana the Last Hope here. And if you're Phil, what is it that you really need to do to kind of potentially work your way out of this scenario? Is there a way out for Phil, or is he just sitting here and playing a game that he can't possibly win? Yeah,
and that's a really great exercise to always do when you're playing. Is like, if you're in a losing position, to think to yourself, like, okay, to make this a winning position, make this a winning game for me, what would that look like? What draws would I need to have? How can I play to those draws? And, I'm not really myself seeing a line here, but you can think through how would that look. And I think one of the things that he just stated, which is Flicker Wisping Liliana to reset her loyalty counters, is, at least a start, because it sets back her ultimate a lot, which if that goes off, you just literally can't win. So, right. You bought yourself a little bit of time, and maybe you can draw a couple more mana sources. But, considering that a lot of the white creatures that Phil plays are very low toughness, I don't really know how he's going to be able to get a critical mass going or any board presence going with the Liliana. I mean, maybe a Baleful Strix Mirror Crusader would be a good start, but...
Yeah, absolutely here. And we do see Brian is kind of aggressively making use of his cantrips here. He knows that this game is very much in his favor, so he's trying to work in such a way that he's able to ensure that the game ends here. And so we're just going to see, a hand of Brian, a Fatal Push, Lightning Bolt, Jace the Mind Sculptor, and Ponder, all really fantastic cards here. And just going to go ahead and pass it back to Phil. Phil draws a Stoneforge Mystic. That's going to get another equipment out of his deck, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be enough here. This Fatal Push is going to come at the end step. Going to go ahead, fire off that Stoneforge Mystic. It's really another heads-up play from Brian. Brian saw Mirror Crusader. He knows that that's an option. He knows he doesn't have a good answer to it right now, so he's just going to go ahead and hold the bolt.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing is that, in these kind of matchups, actually, if you have a stable mana base and you don't know for sure you're going to be able to produce the red, I believe that Lightning Bolt kills just about everything that Fatal Push does, and I think in some cases more, because you don't have to rely on Revolt to trigger it for the 3 and 4 CMC creatures.
We're going to see an attack for 4
I guess not the Batterskull Dream token, but...
Yeah, we're going to see an attack for 4 here, bring Phil down to 5. Jace is going to come off the top 0, draw some cards. Scalding Tarn pass for Brian here. Planes off the top, pretty good here, actually. And part of the reason this is really good is this is going to give Phil a chance to attempt to equip this Sword of Fire and Ice here, which is going to line up really well against everything that BBD is doing.
Well, that would be the case if BBD wasn't able to just fire off this Lightning Bolt in response.
Absolutely here. And I do believe that there's also a Diabolic Edict on top of Brian's deck here. So I believe that he also just might let this happen, draw this Diabolic Edict with Jace, Edict, and then Bolt plus attack for 4. Or Colgan's Command is probably going to do more than enough here. Or I guess an attack for 2 with Strix and Bolt also does it. No reason, I guess, to get super fancy like the rest of us.
Right. I mean, just like the last game where, there were a fair few number of lines that ensured Phil won when he untapped and attacked. I think there were a fair few ways to slice that one, too. So, all right, going to Game 3. That's good to see. So, how do you think these players will adjust their sideboards, given what happened in Game 2?
I don't think Phil is going to make any changes. His game plan is incredibly linear in this matchup. He really needs to try and bury Brian early by getting ahead on board as fast as possible and try and leverage cards like Gideon. Brian is obviously not going to make any changes, as we just saw, but it is always an option for Brian to possibly be able to board back in Forcible. We've seen cards like Rest in Peace. You have to assume that there are going to be cards like Gideon Ally of Zendikar. And these are going to be all cards that you're going to want to have an answer potentially on the draw when you're falling farther behind, but that's not really what Brian's looking for. He's just going to go ahead and resubmit the same thing. We're going to see a mulligan here too.
Yeah, I mean, I think Phil definitely needed a mulligan with one planes and 6 other cards and no other mana sources or 8 vials. I think that's definitely a mulligan. I'm a little surprised that BBD kept this. I guess he did have a 1-lander, which I think is not great. It was an island, which means that, Phil can't waste him off it. But, if Phil has a Richard import here and, if BBD didn't hit another land, he'd be in trouble. Even as it is, I guess BBD looks like he'll be on 2 lands for quite a while because he had a second island, right? So 2 islands plus a swamp. So he could get up to 2 islands plus a swamp, but that doesn't cast all the cards in his hand. Doesn't cast Liliana, doesn't cast Jace, and so he'll have to be fetching for a non-basic at some point and turning the wastelands on.
Right, and this is great for Brian. Brian is going to go ahead and draw another Bloodstained Mire, so up to 3 lands means he's going to be able to cast everything in the deck. Thoughtseize here is going to go ahead and go after Phil's hand. Phil's hand, not very good against Thoughtseize. This Gideon Ally of Zendikar is going to hit the bid, and I think this Pithy Needle is going to come down and shut Phil out.
Name Aether Vial, jeez.
I think we might be naming Aether Vial here. I think it's possible for BBD to beat Wasteland at some point in time.
You're totally right.
Especially with 21 lands.
Wow. I mean, I thought that things could go pretty wrong for BBD, but man, that turn was great.
Right. And another Aether Vial off the top here. This is brutal for Phil. Phil had a scry at the bottom. I don't know if you saw the scry, but the scry was another vial. That's so many vials here for
Oh man, and now BBD gets to rub it in with the hymn to the face.
Oh, boy. And I think we're going to see in the face of Wasteland, I think we're more likely to see this Liliana tick up. Phil is in this weird scenario where he has to draw exactly Plains Council's Judgment over the next couple of turns to be able to make use out of Liliana here.
Right. I think we're getting one of those situations where I mean, it's too early to really call it, but it looks like Phil's in a really tough spot and just drawing another Plains. Yeah. I mean, this is I think a tough matchup for Death and Taxes, even with 3 Mirror Crusaders. And if you're a deck that plays 23, 24 lands plus 4 Aether Vials, there's going to be some games where you just draw too many mana sources when you don't have the cantrips to kind of try and smooth your process, for instance, to put them back.
Absolutely here. And we do see Brian does have 21 lands himself, so he is likely to draw a bunch of different sources here. Baleful Strix is going to go ahead and draw Polluted Delta, Scalding Tarn, and this Liliana Plus. And BPD, I think, is just going to be content to kind of sit back, wait, and hope his opponent doesn't draw a Council Judgment off the top for this Liliana here. And Phil did not.
Did Phil side them in?
I believe Phil did, yes.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I think a large part of why the Council Judgments are there is to answer Planeswalkers, which can be a real problem for Death and Taxes since it relies on the board so heavily.
And Phil here drew a card here that kind of accurately represents what his future is in this league, and that's going to be resting in peace here.
Yeah. R.I.P. This is tough. I think that we're just going to see a Jace, and you're going to see the dream team of Lily plus Jace. Not the Lily at the Veil plus Jace, but.
Yeah, and with another Polluted Delta in Brian's hand, it's going to be pretty hard for him to be, shut out from being able to cast any of the spells. And even if Brian doesn't cast another spell, Liliana plus Jace plus Strix plus Fatal Push should be more than enough to, kind of collapse anything that Phil can present, with the exception of Council Judgment here.
Mm-hmm. And I think this kind of game is showing the strength of having at least 2 or 3 basics in decks that want to get to 3-4 mana, because even though it can kind of pinch you a little bit in terms of having access to all these colors, it really does allow you to weather the early game and at least get to cast some of your bigger spells once or twice before getting wastelanded. So I think that was really important for BBD to get the basic island down and then the basic swamp to kind of get past those first couple turns and be able to cast his big haymaker spells. But, you could imagine a situation in which this game went very differently. Instead of, shuffling that Ponder and drawing the Bloodstained Mire, BBD shuffled that Ponder and drew either not a land or drew a non-basic land, and then Phil just wasted him, and he was, at 1 land. So this game could have gone very differently.
Oh, absolutely. It definitely is a weird situation. And there's also, Phil could have certainly drawn a bunch of creatures. Like, imagine if he drew the Stoneforge Mystic instead of something like Rest in Peace earlier. That would have been fantastic for him. Because Stoneforge Mystic is going to come down. It's going to get Sword of Fire and Ice. He's going to pass back to Brian, whose hand of Fatal Push, Snapcaster Mate, Kolaghan's Command, Volcanic Island, Polluted Delta, and a field of Liliana and Jace the Mind Sculptor. Probably going to be more than good enough here to kind of take out whatever can be presented here. And this J0 is going to find double Hymn to Torok Thoughtseize here. So I think that might just kind of wrap. I mean,
I'm pretty sure you could make BBD discard his hand and no drawing any cards for the rest of the game, and he'd probably be able to get there with the 2 Planeswalkers he has on the board.
Absolutely here. This Hymn to Torok is going to take out the Aether Vial and the Sword of Fire and Ice in Phil's hand, leaving him simply with Rest in Peace here. I think this Liliana is actually going up to 7 this turn.
Yeah, I believe you're right, because I think unless he killed a creature this turn already, the Stoneforge Mystic would be have its power and toughness adjusted, so I think you're probably right on that front, but I may have missed it if he activated it earlier.
Yeah, and we're going to see here Kolaghan's Command. Yeah, Kolaghan's Command is just going to kind of rip out whatever is in left. Stoneforge Mystic is going to be gone. Liliana is going to tick up to 7 here, and I think the -7 on Liliana next turn, if Phil is unable to draw a Council Judgment, is going to go ahead and end this and recur the guard off the top. Not going to be good enough. It is unfortunately not going to be good enough for Phil here. There's nothing that he can get that is going to save him from this Liliana the Last Veil creating an army of zombies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So while we have this opportunity here, why don't we have a really interesting part for Legacy Premier League, something that, we haven't really had before, and that is everybody who's playing knows what their opponent is playing in the next round. So we have this interesting opportunity, Tom, to discuss what we could do, what these players' matchups are going to look like. And now next week, we're going to be playing the losers round 2. We're going to have Bob Wong versus Andrea Mengucci. We're going to have Julian Knob versus Jarvis Yu, Caleb Durward versus Vincent Chandler. We're going to have Noah Walker, unless Brian suddenly collapses as his computer dies and he times out. We're going to have Noah Walker versus Brian Braun-Duin. Now, I'm excited for some of these matchups here, and the one I'm especially excited for is Noah versus BBD, because that is a Grixis control mirror here. And something kind of interesting, and part of the reason that I actually played a Liliana's Defeat in my Grixis control sideboard is because Brian messaged me to tell me he was playing that card in his sideboard, and he thought it was just going to be very good, based on what people were playing here. And he has 2. And he's played against Noah, which is the one matchup that you probably want in multiple ones. It kills Liliana, Strix, and Angler here. This is going to be an interesting matchup here. The question is Noah has Search for Scanthet in the main deck. BBD has Liliana's Defeat in the sideboard. What kind of card do you think might match up a little better here? And who do you think might possibly be favored based on deck list alone?
So I don't have the deck list in front of me, but it does seem like Search for Scanthet could be really good in the control mirror in a matchup in which neither your opponent doesn't have Wasteland or a reliable way to answer enchantment. So I imagine that could be a pretty good trump card there. Liliana's Defeat sounds good too. I think that it's really nice for answering anglers and Liliana's and things of that nature. I guess Gristlebrand too, right? That's kind of cool.
Technically it does kill Gristlebrand, although I don't think that's going to come up in this league.
Right.
But on the other side of Noah and Brian's bracket is Caleb Durward versus Vincent Chandler. That's Death and Taxes versus Steel Stompy here. Do you have any insight into this matchup?
Death and Taxes versus Steel Stompy. I don't think I've ever seen that play out. So I guess on the one hand, Steel Stompy can get some artifacts on the board and just have a Steel Overseer just make them all big, which I believe it plays that. So, 4 versus Lapachers doesn't really, is not really enough oomph to stop a lot of creatures being dumped on the board. And I guess Mother of Runes isn't that great because, artifacts aren't of a particular color. So, double waste for the there you go. Okay, so this is the bracket you were describing a minute ago. So I don't know if you want to maybe run us through it again in a little bit more detail, or
absolutely. So let's run through. So on our one side we have our winners bracket. Let's talk about that. We have the winners semis. We're gonna have Michael Bondi playing Chaos Elves. Not a deck that Michael Bondi is known for, especially he's known as a Death and Taxes wizard. He's gonna be playing against Brian Cook. Brian Cook also coming with a deck that he's not really known for. He brought Miracles. The inventor of TES, Bryant Cook, is playing Miracles, and that's a wild deck. And while the matchup used to be insanely favored for Miracles, or at least mostly favored for Miracles, this is a different version of it. It doesn't have the same amount of consistency as it did with Sensei's Divining Top. There is no counterbalance to really shut down as easily as it used to be, although Bryant does have a couple copies of it. So I think this is going to be actually a really close matchup. Bondi has a lot of draws where he can just put in a few creatures, slam on Bryant, force him to try and wrath away, and then just fill the board again and flood the board. And that to me is, potentially the kind of recipe that you need to be able to beat Bryant.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me.
Right.
So I guess then we have. Oh, go ahead.
And then it's myself playing Grixis Control versus Jody Keith playing Standstill, and this is a matchup where I'm not really sure who's favored. I think it technically might be me because I have the card Pyroblast and Jody does not, and that is a huge, huge difference and a very vital difference, especially in these fair matchups. But Jody does have Standstill, which is obviously kind of really good against fair decks, especially when my deck does nothing for so long.
Right. I gotta ask, why did you choose to run Grixis Control over Four-Color Alone here for the playoffs?
So I took a look at who was playing. I saw Bondi, I saw Bob, I saw Brian, Julian, Jody, Caleb, and Noah, and I guessed that based on who I was playing, that there might be a decent mix of both combo decks and control decks, and because of that, I do like Four-Color Loam against some of the combo decks. If Bryant plays Storm, that might be a card that's going to be pretty good. But if I got paired up against Caleb, and Caleb is playing his Bomberman deck, and I get paired up against Julian, and Julian is playing Elves, 4-color Loam is not at its best against those decks. And if Bondi is playing, Death and Taxes, I would obviously love to be playing Loam, although that matchup is obviously tough. So between everything that I looked at what people might play, I even guessed that Noah might bring Grixis Control or Blue-Black Death Shadow. And either way, I liked 4-color Loam, but I didn't like 4-color Loam enough to submit it in a bracket where I thought there was going to be potential combo and a bunch of control decks. And I picked a deck that I thought I could build a sideboard to kind of beat. And I obviously got a little lucky against Noah. Noah played very well. But, I think my sideboard was very well built for everything that is being brought to the table in terms of what the players end up playing.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess turning to the losers bracket, we have Bob Wong facing off against Andrea Mengucci. And so Bob is playing Grixis Delver.
Yes.
And what is Andrea?
Andrea is playing blue-red Omnitel. And this is kind of one of those interesting matchups here because Bob, I believe, has access to the card Thoughtseize, which is going to be pretty good. Post board is going to have access.
Yeah, I think he has a mix of Thoughtseize plus Inquisition, and I think he even has a couple of them in the main.
Right, and as well, if we consider a card like Pyroblast post board, there are a lot of very good cards for Bob in this matchup. And Andrea is kind of just playing this very consistent blue-red kind of Omnitel deck where you have multiple ways to win. He's not going to lose to something like... he's not going to lose to something like Ensnaring Bridge or some weird sideboard card. Surgical is going to be much better against him. I believe Bob is playing some of those. So it will be an interesting matchup for sure. I'm not sure who's favorite here. I would assume that it's Grixis Delver because in general, Delver is going to be pretty solid against all these combo matchups. So
fair enough.
I'm going to think Bob is a little bit favored here against Andrea, although, there are sometimes a lot of games, especially game one, where Andrea is just going to go, here's a show and tell, and Bob's going to go, yep, and die.
Well, to your earlier point, since these players know what their opponent's going to be playing for the next match, that is going to be a piece of information in the game one they can use for their mulligan decisions. But anyway, we'll see how that turns out, when we get to that match. But the other one in that side of the losers bracket is Julian Knob. Julian Knob versus
Julian, Elves guy, loves Elves way too much.
Right. So that'll be Elves versus Jarvis and Grixis Delver, I believe. And then there was one more, two more, I guess, down there, which I missed. But
yeah, so that's going to be really interesting. I think Elves might be a little bit favored against Grixis Delver, although, as I believe is kind of shown, it is possible for Delver to kind of just beat it anyway. And then we have Caleb Durward versus Vincent Chandler. That's going to be Steel Stompy versus Death and Taxes, and then Grixis Control Mirror between Noah Walker and Braun-Duin. We did talk a little bit about Caleb earlier, the Caleb match earlier, and the Noah Brian match earlier. So we kind of already covered that. That's going to be kind of interesting. So if you're trying to tune in next week. We're going to be playing the losers round 2. So that's going to be Bob Wong versus Andrea, Julian versus Jarvis, Caleb versus Vincent, and Noah versus Brian. And then the week after that, it's going to be the winners bracket plus losers round 3. So we will have many matches for you to bring over the next few weeks. We are getting into those last few weeks, though. We are getting into the prime time where we're going to start getting close to crowning a winner. Do you have any guesses who you think is going to win?
I guess, I don't know. That's a really good question. So, is it possible for folks in the losers bracket to still? Yes, you can make it up to the grand final.
Yep. So anybody in the losers bracket, they can win this match, win their quarters, and then win the semis, and then they'll make it into the losers final. Whoever wins in the losers final. Basically, here's how it's going to work, right? So the winners bracket will play. There'll be a winners final. The winners final will be 3 decks, best out of 5. Whoever wins there, locked into the grand final. Whoever loses goes into the losers final. Now, whoever wins the losers bracket plays the second place in the winner bracket in the losers final. Whoever plays there plays the grand finals. If you are in the losers bracket, though, and you do win and you do get into the grand finals, you do have to win 2 back-to-back best of 5s in order to be crowned the champion, while the winner only needs to win 1.
Got it. That's cool. So that means that, even if you're in the losers bracket, until you're like fully like eliminated, you still have a chance to get all the way to the champion. So,
yes.
That being said, you have to play more matches. Your chances are not as good, but, you can still go there. So who do you like for going all the way?
I like that Rudy Brixa guy. He's
I thought you were going to say that, Rudy.
Very, very handsome at the very minimum. So even if he loses, he'll do it looking handsome. But no, in all honesty, when I picked the winner here, I picked I actually picked BBD here or Noah to win the entire thing when I looked at the bracket originally. So I wouldn't be surprised to see whoever wins the match between Noah and Brian shove their way all the way to the grand finals and then win the game.
Well, that's the thing about the losers bracket, right? 2 players enter and 1 leaves and 1's out of the tournament for good, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So in the losers bracket, if you lose, you are out, and if you do win, then you do get to keep playing. And if you lose in the winners bracket, you drop down to the losers bracket.
Right.
But I think that is going to do it for us.
So before we go, I think we're going to just go ahead and thank our sponsors again one last time. So, Hard Hoarder,
MTG First, Cardboard.live.
We're live and with support from the Epic Storm. So thank you again for tuning in. Please remember to check in and join us next week when we proceed to the next stage of the Legacy Premier League. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for next week, Tom. I hope to see you there.
Yep. All right. Have a good night, everybody.